Hey, Ann. How's that? Hello, everybody. We're at the work session for Tuesday, June the 28th. Welcome, everybody. We're going to start out with a roll call. And Alderman Barnhill.
Present.
Vice Mayor Blanton.
Here.
Alderman Hanson.
Here.
Alderman Peterson.
Here.
Alderman Berger, absent. Alderman Brown.
Here.
Alderman Potts, absent. Alderman Baggett.
Present.
Okay, and the mayor is here also. So we now open up the floor for citizen comments for items that are not on the agenda. We know the routine where we have speaker cards. People give those speaker cards to me and I call them up. I have no speaker cards, so we're going to keep rolling and we're going to go to a presentation of the Downtown Neighborhood Association survey results, and we have Lynn McAllister and we have Bob Ravner with us. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. And thank you to all the aldermen. This is actually going to be my last time to present to you as president of the Downtown Neighborhood Association. But I have good news. There are. I have been on the board for 6 years and 4 years as president, and I roll off in August, and Bob is going to take over as our new Downtown Neighborhood Association president. As you can imagine, when he joined the board, he immediately rose as a leader in our group, bringing in some new initiatives that will go on and outlive probably even Bob being on the board. So I'm excited to hand over the reins to such a qualified individual. So I'm glad that you're here. So this is me putting the mantle on. I also want to one more time tell you how much I appreciate the responsiveness of each of you. I have talked to all of you or emailed with you or texted with you many times, and I really appreciate you've never turned me down. So I really appreciate the time that each of you have spent as I've brought different issues to light. Tonight, we are actually here to talk about the 2022 DNA survey. This is the most lengthy survey we have attempted. If you completed it, it took 12 minutes to do. And it was by far more detailed with the questions, and we also had more open-ended questions. So what I would like to do is just read the questions, and then I'm giving you the 10,000 foot high view. I'm not going to go through everything. If any of you would like the entire survey, either what SurveyMonkey sends you with all the little graphs, or if you want the whole 205 pages with everyone's response, I'm happy to email whatever you would like to you. But I didn't want to just load you down with stuff that you may or may not care to have more information about. And we also did this survey a little bit differently. It's actually in 3 different parts. The first part was regarding quality of life in downtown Franklin. The second part were businesses. And then the third part was government. And so that's kind of how we did it this year. So the first question was, please rank 1 to 12 how important the following are for the quality of life in downtown Franklin, with 1 being the most important. So what the idea behind this was, wherever you choose to live, Franklin or anywhere else, what is it that you're looking for that's most important to you? And then, not surprisingly, the number 1 answer was personal safety. That came up in almost a third of people's answers as the number 1 choice is personal safety. The second one was public services. The third one was traffic flow. Fourth was historic preservation, and then the fifth was walkability, and that included both urban and natural trails. The second question was, please add any additional comments about anything you would specifically like added or improved that would positively affect your quality of life. And both of those, there were dozens of responses, but there were 2 that came up over and over and over again, and one was noise abatement for downtown Franklin, and the other one was still even better walkability. And again, that came up as a theme. They like the walkability of downtown Franklin, but they feel like it can still be improved.
I would add to that as well, as part of the, we joined the Downtown Franklin Association this year as well for the first time. So we've got the DNA and the DFA going to their monthly meetings as well, and the noise abatement piece came up in the DFA as well.
Thank you. Number 3, the question was, please rate on a scale of 1 to 5 the effectiveness of the following community efforts. 1 being the most effective, 5 being the least effective. And this sort of came out of the fact that I'm also on the Franklin Tomorrow Outreach Committee, trying to figure out how, with all the people that we have moving in, how to get them connected, how to make them feel welcomed. And that was part of the impetus behind this question. And so this is based on a weighted average of how people responded. Number 1, people felt like we were effective as a community in finding ways for people to engage or volunteer. Number 2, people felt like we were effective in, well, I'll read it exactly as it was. It was, how effective are we as a community in getting people involved or relating to people? And so we were first looking at just anyone who's been here. Are we providing ways for them to volunteer? And people said yes. That was the number 1 thing. People said, yes, we're good at doing that. Secondly was how that we're effective as far as the government. Let me start all that again. As a community, we're effective at providing opportunities for input on governing, including infrastructure, housing, and schools. So people feel like they have an opportunity to come before you guys and other city staff. Third was effective at welcoming newcomers. And then 4th, an area where we can improve, is welcoming people from various cultures. Question number 4, what would you consider the features, not including the wonderful people who live here, as that make you most proud to live in downtown Franklin? And people, it was an open-ended question, so people could put whatever they liked. And again, there were dozens of responses. But 60% of those responses either had the word historic, preservation, or history in them. And then 50% had either walkability, walkable, or pedestrian. And that was completely their feedback with us, not trying to lead them in any direction at all. Question 5, is there any reason you would choose to leave downtown Franklin? 1/3 of them said that it would be traffic congestion or the speed of vehicles in downtown Franklin that would cause them to actually choose to leave living in downtown Franklin. And 25% of them had either the words overdevelopment or residences zoned to become businesses or residences zoned to commercial. That kind of idea would cause people to choose not to live in downtown Franklin anymore. The 3rd area is in businesses. And we focused particularly on Columbia Avenue and said in the near future, sections of Columbia Avenue will be redeveloped, both the previous H.G. Hill property as well as the previous Handy Hardware. So rank your preference for establishments that you would like to see in Franklin's historic district. Keep in mind traffic and parking as well as potential tourist revenue. Well, this is not surprising, I guess. All the top 5, by a long shot, all had to do with eating. So the first one was a small or mid-sized grocery store. The second one was a casual or family-friendly restaurant. 3rd is fine dining restaurant. 4th was a pub with outdoor seating. And 5 was a kitchen store with cooking classes. And there were other stuff. There was stores and pharmacies, and they had like a lot to choose from. But we like to eat in Franklin. So, and also in the open-ended question, when it talked about people's walkability, one thing they said over and over is they liked walking to restaurants. So question 7, are there other businesses or amenities you would like to see in downtown Franklin? Something we did not give people as an option. And all the ones that, to a T, the additional ones that we did not have were other kinds of eateries that we had not yet listed. So as we have done in the past, I'm going to share this information with our local developers, just so they know that they're probably safe in putting restaurants in downtown Franklin. Question 8, do you have any reservations regarding development in downtown Franklin? If so, please rate your key concerns, 1 being your greatest, 5 being your least concern. And if you have no concerns, just skip the question. 92% of the people did answer the question, and their number 1 concern with development in downtown Franklin are issues with parking and traffic, again. Number 2, rezoning and residential to commercial properties, and number 3, infilling and development. And then we did government. So this was y'all's scorecard. The first question, number 9, is do you know what the role of the Board of Mayor and Alderman or BOMA is in Franklin? 89% of the people said yes. 11% said no. Now, I'm watching you. The most engaged people always answer these surveys. So I wish we could get a broader perspective, but so the folks that are answering are the folks that understand. Number 10, have you had 1 or more interactions with any of the city aldermen or the mayor? 79% said yes, they had. And then if yes, how would you rate the ease of access to elected officials? And 52% said you were very responsive. 24% said somewhat responsive, 20% said extremely responsive, and then there was 4% that said not so responsive. The last question involves the investments and improvements. So we looked at the 20 published capital improvement projects that are listed on the dashboard of the city. And we listed them with the budget that is associated with them and asked, what do you see as the 5 most vital? They can only pick 5. And the number one response, 80% of the people picked this in the top 5, was Columbia Avenue widening and improvement. And number 2 was the Franklin Road improvements and streetscape, and that was with 75% of the respondents. Next was City Hall, and then Lewisburg Pike sidewalk and multi-use trail, Harlansdale. And then there was a 3-way tie for 6th place, which was the water reclamation facility modifications, the Church Street improvements, and the Bicentennial Park.
The Harlansdale piece was the walking bridge.
Yes.
Pedestrian bridge.
Exactly. So, all of that to say that when we look at this, there seem to be a couple of overriding themes that we saw bubbling up to the top over and over, and I don't think it's going to surprise you. I don't think it would have surprised you before my little presentation. People want more walkability. They see it as a quality of life issue. They want it to be safer. And in the open-ended comments, people list specific places that they do not feel safe when they're walking. Number 2, our downtown residents are very, very, very concerned about traffic. They see it as a quality of life issue, and that came through as both the abundance of cars as well as the noise. And that specifically, I don't think it's just regular car noise. They're talking about the gunning of the motors and that sort of thing. It showed up as on the list of the reasons that they would consider leaving downtown Franklin if traffic continued to get worse. Their number one concern connected with development, again, was traffic. And the good thing is, I feel like this is a positive way that people were really thinking through the process. They were willing to pay to redress this situation because the number 1 and number 2 capital projects they saw as most important were about helping the traffic issues at Columbia Avenue and Franklin Road. So I think that they realized that it's not going to fix itself overnight. So the DNA boards talked a lot about this, as you might imagine. We don't know what we can do to help, but we want to be a part of it. We also know that this problem is born out of success, and we should celebrate that. And if you would consider putting together a task force or something that would involve the citizens, we would be so happy to be a part of that. If there's any way that we can communicate how you are working either strategically to give people sort of a long-term view of what you're doing, and you know, people like Bob and I who read this stuff, we know that there are things in the plans. I'm not sure most people do, and so they're really worried that this isn't going to get any better. It's only going to get worse, and I believe it's going to get better, but people need to have that communication.
One of the things that's been helpful is working with the staff. We know that we've made a lot of progress on walkability. I mean, all the sidewalks that have been added. And there's, I think, an annual document that comes out, at least a one-page flyer, that we've been working with the city to say, you know, hey, keep updating that because we can turn around and send that out to the residents as well and actually show them the real progress that's being made. So sometimes people are just looking at when is this ever going to get done, and they don't see the forest through the trees. And I think we can keep communicating, and we can help facilitate that as well.
That's right. So if we can be part of the solution, we want to be part of the solution. And I, once again, and just in closing, thank you again. I have enjoyed very much my time working with you as the president of the DNA, and I appreciate so much all of your smiles and your everything you've been. You've just been great. So thank you so much.
We hope the incoming president will have as much enthusiasm and energy as the current president. Just a little hint.
Big shoes to fill.
Any questions for Lynn or Bob? Yeah, I think this is very valuable information. You know, the Downtown Neighborhood Association has their finger on the pulse a lot and understand what a lot of and not all the members live downtown. They live from all over in the city, and so the fact that they're bringing you're bringing those things to us, I'd be curious on sit down and understand what you're meaning by task force at some point in time, and I can have that conversation with you at another time. And
That would be great. I'd appreciate that.
I would also say, and one, if you want the survey, we can get it to you. It might be helpful to see that. But
Okay, I can do that.
on the communication front, other things that have worked well, I know we've done a couple of meetings with, whether it was about the city hall, the new city hall proposal, which we learned a lot by getting the community there to hear it. Patrick did a meeting at the Fourth Avenue Church. We've had several other meetings that I think for our residents have proved very helpful as well. And I think it's as much as what is being said about not a lot of people are staying close to things, and so to actually get a captive audience toward that end has been very helpful in the examples that we've seen.
I think so too. And the last thing, to your point, we are celebrating our 25th year. August 7th, we're having our annual meeting, which will also be a little celebration of 25 years of the DNA. So I hope you'll make plans to come. It's going to be at the Enrichment Center at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a Sunday afternoon. It'll be a couple of hours. And our speaker is going to be Alan Arender. And he's going to talk about the factory and some of the exciting changes there. And we're going to have Patrick Thomas from Studio 10. We'll do a couple of songs because we're going to have a new theater in the factory. So we're excited to celebrate all that. Thank you again.
thank you. Everybody good? Okay. How about a liquor license for Long Point Wine and Spirits LLC, doing business as Long Point Wine and Spirits, owned by Darshan Patel? Any questions? Item 3 is Resolution 2022-43, a resolution declaring certain right-of-way located within the Fieldstone Farms HOA as surplus.
This is the segment that had been eliminated in the major thoroughfare plan. This kind of closes the loop on that by declaring it surplus, and then we'll work with the HOA to get that ownership transferred over to them.
Got you. There you
That
go.
little segment there, Fieldstone Parkway extension, which is no longer in our roadway plan, thoroughfare plan.
Everybody good? Keep rolling along. How about a resolution 2022-30, resolution amending Wood Court PUD subdivision to extend the vesting rights for the property located east of Carruthers Parkway and south of Murfreesboro Road, establishing a public hearing for July the 12th. Hey, Wayne. And Greg? Amy?
Yes,
Sorry I overlooked you.
that's okay. Hi, Mr. Mayor. Would you like me to get started? Yeah?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So the request is for a vesting extension for 3 years or until September 9th, 2025. The current plan is for 237 multifamily units within 8 buildings. They range from 2 to 4 stories. The plan had 1 modification of standards approved to reduce parking requirements. The current status is that there is, they have vesting until September 9th, 2022. They do not have a valid site plan today, but they have a site plan moving through the process for approval currently. The applicant requested that the vesting extension, they cited ever-changing market conditions and the impact of the COVID-19 virus pandemic, as well as significant amount of coordination needed with FEMA as reasons for the delay in the progress. In terms of vesting impacts, if the vesting period is not extended and they don't meet the first milestone of vesting by September 9th, 2022, their vesting would cease to exist and they'd be required to submit a completely new plan for the project, for the property. Let's see, since the vesting of this project, all 6 of the city's development standards have been updated. And in looking at those regulations and reviewing the current plan against current regulations, the vested plan versus current regulations, that might help. The current plan would not meet some development standards and they would have to be redesigned. One of the main components of that would be the frontage requirements that we have in today's ordinance. All new buildings would be required to face a public street, a private street, or an internal drive, and all parking not otherwise associated with parallel parking along those drive aisles would be required to be completely behind the buildings. Parking could not be to the side of the buildings or in between buildings. These frontage requirements help to codify and envision Franklin's guiding principles of vibrant neighborhoods, exceptional design, and connected community. The frontage requirements would challenge this design to relocate parking within an already narrow site. The proposal took advantage of the hillside by nestling some of the buildings into the topography, but this orientation would not allow for parking to be then behind buildings if the buildings themselves are nestled into a hillside. And so the density of the site and or the number of buildings proposed may not be able to be maintained as currently provided. They may or may not need a parking reduction and need to request a modification of standards. That would be up for debate based on the new design. And lastly, staff would still require that a bridge replacement for any project on this site and would require a second emergency access point, continuing the necessary coordination with FEMA. So with any vesting extension, the Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen must decide if approving the vesting extension is in the best interest of the community, that is from the state law language. Should the vesting extension be denied, the applicant may still continue to work towards meeting the first vesting milestone prior to their vesting expiring. And so when this is up for a vote at the public hearing, BOMA will need to decide whether the continuation of vested rights is in the best interest of the community. So I can answer any questions about vesting or the project itself.
Any questions or comments? We do have Greg Gamble and Wayne Weaver here to,
I've got some questions. So the plan that's presented on this exhibit, is that the existing plan that was submitted during the other overlays, not the current existing
Right.
zoning
The plan
overlays?
that's attached is what is vested today.
But that would change dramatically, correct?
Correct. So the plan that's on your iPad there is you have buildings with parking surrounding it. That's not how the current ordinance would require design. Parking would have to be behind buildings, and they'd have to put all buildings along an internal drive aisle that would look like a street. It could have parallel parking on the street, but parking lots would have to be behind the building. So,
any other questions, Gabrielle? Thank you.
We've had some of these come up before us in the last few months, and those have all been extended. Major differences between the ones that we've done in this, or
the ones in the past, staff has done an analysis of the vested plan against the current ordinances, and we felt that in those previous ones that the changes that would have to be made would not make a significant impact to the character or the design of the project, that it could be essentially the same plan under the new ordinance, and we have reported that to you in these reports. This is different because this one, the changes to the ordinance, specifically the zoning ordinance, would make a substantial change to the property. The
but there
design.
would have been changes. But it doesn't meet current zoning. The other ones we approved did not meet our current zoning ordinance.
There were minor things about some of the other
Well,
ones, not
what's the
all of
difference
them.
between minor and major? I mean, I guess that's where minor to you all. I mean,
Well, I
I
guess
mean,
I have to
you
think
don't
of
have to
a
go through all of them,
specific
but I guess there's
example.
some sort of there's a bit of, opinion. I mean, we've got a really well-respected community organization here.
Yeah.
That there's a lot at stake, and so nuances are important, I guess, because we've approved them, even though they didn't meet the current zoning ordinance in the recent past, and so. Yeah, that's why it's important.
I'd have to look back at all the specific ones. I can think of two right now, but I can't think of my complete analysis, so that's okay. But for example, Orium was one of them that you recently approved. That was designed with frontages in mind. While it wasn't the requirement of the ordinance, the majority of those buildings, I think, if not all of them, would meet frontage requirements today. So while they may not meet the BMP manual standards of today, in discussions with engineering felt that the changes that would be required for stormwater could be met within sort of the conceptual layout that was proposed. So that's what I mean by minor.
Any other questions from the board?
I don't have questions, but I'd like to hear from them and then figure out if
Sure,
I have questions.
sure.
But
Well, we got Wayne and Greg. Who's going first?
I'll go first. Good evening, everyone. How are you? Just to speak to this, I'm probably going to say what everybody knows, is that we are in a very unique market post-COVID. And you all probably hear from the developers, I'm sure, a lot, and I've heard these same stories about delays in construction, cost overruns. And to do a project like this for an organization like CHP, which has been around a long time, is quite an undertaking. And it was being done with very slim margins to do something really good for this community, which I believe CHP does a lot of good in this community and has done since 1994. The way that developers, in my opinion, have approached these circumstances post-COVID is, we all know, everyone has named their price. And they're able to move forward and increase the cost and pass that on to the consumer. And so for us, if we attempted to blaze forward with a project, we would have ended up with a market rate project that would not have met our charter as an organization that is, that builds affordable housing, and that's what our charter says that we're to do. So if we were here attempting to do this project, that's what would be happening, because the margins were so slim to begin with, and everybody knows building affordable housing is difficult. And when you're trying to price things at $225,000, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a market where the cost have just greatly increased, and now interest rates are double, and you can't pass those on to an affordable buyer. It just makes it impossible for you to do. So we find ourselves in a difficult situation. And so we have done what we believed was the best choice with regards to the best thing for the community. Is the best thing for the community is to find a solution where we could have some form of affordable housing still in the project, and to use what we could make from this project going forward to build other affordable housing in the city, a significant amount in my opinion. So that's about, what else can I say? I mean, it's a challenging. We want to build affordable housing, and we wanted this project more than anything. And if it were possible for us to have moved forward quickly and done it and been successful doing it, we certainly would have done it 100%. But this is where we find ourselves.
And I'd just like to reiterate, Greg Gamble, I'd just like to reiterate what Amy said. Losing the vesting rights on this property would cause a complete redesign of the master plan. The parking that is shown in front of the buildings on this plan is between the floodplain and the building. And in some instances, parking is just below the 100-year floodplain. Not by a lot, but just enough that it's barely covered by the 100-year floodplain. The buildings cannot be in the 100-year floodplain. So the buildings, we don't have the luxury of pushing those buildings closer to the creek where the parking is now. It's not an even swap. It's not like we can just put the parking behind the buildings. Behind the buildings today are 14 to 20 to 25% slopes that are undevelopable. So we worked very closely with staff very early on to determine the limits of where grading could even take place on this property. And as Amy said, there's a very kind of narrow window by which development could take place. Without the plan that is currently approved and invested, all of the kind of gains that Community Housing Partnership has made so far on the entitlements of this property would be lost. And the group, the entity that Community Housing Partnership has found is committed to affordable housing for this site, so for this property with this development plan. The site plan that was submitted, was approved, has expired. So we've resubmitted that now, and it's going back through staff for reapproval under the existing vesting. But in order for them to move forward, they have to be able to break ground prior to September. of 2022. It's a very tight window to be able to do that, so we're asking for that extension in order to be able to proceed.
Anybody else have a question?
So the breaking ground doesn't meet the first threshold?
The first threshold is that they have to get a site plan approved, they have to get permits issued, and the language of state law is that they have to begin site preparation. So getting some infrastructure started.
Okay.
Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Mine's not as much a question as just going back to the discussion a few minutes ago when we talked about the comparison between other projects that we've extended vesting and differences in the requirements that are now, there's a lot of places, hundreds of places in this community that would never fit in today's zoning. That's just the normal churn of life. I personally don't have a problem with the frontage. I think knowing where this is situated, it's a destination. It's not a cut through where people are going to be driving by and saying, "Oh my goodness, look at this." So I think we have a housing situation regardless of the price point. And I think that this product was done thoughtfully, and I think that it would be good to add access to that side of town for more opportunities for just housing in general. So I'm not going to split hairs over changes that have happened in the zoning ordinance in the past however many months or years. But the geographical placement of this situation, from what I understand, the zoning changes, it's not going to make a huge difference in where this is situated.
Alderman Brown, you haven't had a chance to speak. If you want to speak, then I'll recognize Alderman Baggett.
Just one question on the partner that you found. We feel good. They're going to implement the same plan. What gives them the ability to implement that same plan that you're not able to operate? I guess I just want to make sure we're bringing in this new partner to implement this development plan. Do we know that they're for sure going to be able to do it too?
It would not be 100% affordable housing.
But the layout, the general development plan would exist. Is it going to change?
They are proposing to add a swimming pool, and they're removing some of the units on the ground floor of one of the buildings to add a club room, club offices, fitness club.
And Greg, to that point, that's a part of the site plan that's going through right now.
It's part
So
of the site
staff's
plan.
reviewing that right now to make sure that that could be done.
Go ahead, Alderman Baggett.
I don't have nothing more to add other than just by looking at this plan, you've got the hill on one side and the stream on the other. And like, as Alderman Blanton said, that it's a destination. I'll support the extension.
I'm kind of curious, how you were financing it and now how it's moving, what the finances are for the new person that's taking this over. Is it tax credits and things of that nature? I don't know if that's a legitimate question, but.
Well, they're a very different organization than CHP, so they can certainly secure financing in a different way than we can. I mean, it is a for-profit organization that does all of their developments have some portion of affordable in it. So it's a little different situation very different situation actually than CHP.
So do other developers in our community use tax credits besides CHP?
Well, tax credits are limited to rental developments. And I mean, throughout the nation, the majority of funding is for rental housing using tax credits, but not for sale projects.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. Any other questions?
Franklin Housing Authority, they do use tax credits today for a lot of the developments that they're doing, a lot of the redevelopments.
And CHP does. Yeah.
We do not use tax credits because they're
Yours are for sale.
For sale.
for sale, mostly
Gotcha.
for sale.
Okay.
Yes.
I appreciate that clarification. Any other questions? Ready to move on? Item 5, Resolution 2022-28, a resolution amending the Madison PUD subdivision to extend the vesting rights for the property located at 801 Del Rio Pike, establishing a public hearing.
Okay. The request for the Madison is to extend the vested rights for additional 3 years or until March 10th, 2026. This plan proposes the demolition, this is an existing multifamily complex. They are proposing the demolition of one building and the construction of 3 additional multifamily buildings. It would increase the total unit count for the site by 64 units. They had 2 modification of standards requests approved, reducing the required buffer widths at the time. They cited the existing building placement and the presence of established vegetation, and it was supported by staff and approved by BOMA. The conditions that BOMA placed on the plan was to remove the conditional approval requiring a full access to Brink Place, and so instead they have an emergency access to that neighborhood street. They currently have a site plan. It is awaiting its final approval through the one-stop process, and the plan is valid until July 2022, July 15th, 2022, sorry. In terms of applicant requests, they again cited the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to finalize a drainage easement as reasons why they had delays in their progress. In terms of vesting impacts, again, the staff analyzed that the vested plan against current regulations, and the plan generally complies. Similarly, the biggest challenge this plan would have to meet new ordinance requirements is the frontage requirements for the buildings. The site layout and locations of the buildings and parking lots within the existing development limit the location of where you could put a new building and parking lots. New buildings would be required to face an internal drive, like I said before, and reducing the type of parking in front of a building limits the parking placement for the required spaces needed. It's unknown if the same density could be met under the current development standards, and the allowable density would be highly dependent on a new design that complies with the ordinance. However, since the site is already an existing development, application of the frontage standards to only the new buildings may require changes that are easily accommodated in a new plan. Alternatively, if the development was allowed to continue under its current plan, the proposed buildings and parking placements would be consistent with the other 17 buildings on the site. If they had to get a new plan, they'd still have to require this access to Brink Place, and that decision would have to be made again. A modification of standards for transition zones may be required, but it would only be needed in areas where this plan abutted single-family residential, not the entire site anymore. And so it is in your court to determine whether the extension of the vested rights is in the best interest of the community. And I can answer any questions.
Vice Mayor.
I remember this one well. I remember us really haggling over the emergency access to Brink Place. And, you know, again, I can't say that COVID brought anybody in this world any favors. And I think, as you said, it makes no sense to have an existing apartment complex add on and then change the way they're faced just because of our zoning ordinance. To me, it's not making any sense. We want things to be consistent. That's that word. So this is definitely one that I can support, and I think it goes back to what Patrick said. It seems like down the pike we've kind of been consistently giving people grace, and I think this is definitely one of those things that makes sense.
Anybody else? Item 6, proposed changes to certificate of use and occupancy issuance process.
So we have a team coming up from our development services group. We're going to walk you through an overview and give you a chance to give us some feedback about an update to how we work with certificates of occupancy and maybe provide a little more clarity about how they apply to building ownership and use changes. And so we'll walk through that with you. Be glad to answer any questions and then get any guidance you want to provide us. So I'm not sure who's kicking it off. Vernon, are you going to start us off?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Alderman. Today is just a brief brief introduction into, thank you. Maybe forget. A brief introduction into something we've worked with the Development Services Advisory Commission and our team on for quite some time, as it relates to how we process certificates of use and occupancy. And you may recall when we were on the tour, the second tour, we were visiting some projects and sites that talked about performance sureties. Well, performance sureties is part of the certificate of use and occupancy process, but it comes at the end. And what we're talking about is really at the beginning. And there's some vagueness that exists in our municipal code that Catherine is just going to briefly, at a very high level, share with you some of that vagueness. And I want you to know that the Development Services Advisory Commission has discussed this piece in detail. And what we'd like to walk away with is your support to go back and draft an amendment to the municipal code that clarifies when certificates of use and occupancy are required. Now, for many years, Rodney and Shanna, yeah, maybe I should have left the microphone off. But we've always asked and encouraged people that are contemplating either leasing or purchasing a non-residential building to reach out to them, our Building and Neighborhood Services Department, and schedule what would we call as a pre-occupancy meeting. And it's at no charge, but Shanna and Rodney and some representatives from our fire department, building department, maybe the engineering department, depending on what is being contemplated, would meet with the future business owner, maybe his general contractor, and understand what their vision is for their property, for the property they're looking to lease or buy. But that doesn't occur all the time. And even some of the new aldermen have been privy to some of those situations there where somebody's leased the property and started a business or a church or whatever, a school, and it's not properly zoned. And that doesn't sit well with us because we want to help people succeed. And trying to get the message out to talk to us earlier in the process starts with talking to us about whether or not a certificate of use and occupancy is needed, and helping them understand if the property's properly zoned, and then to talk to them about what might be required. And more importantly, what their long-term vision is, because we want to make sure they're successful. So I've said a lot, but what Catherine is going to go over is there's some vagueness in our municipal code. We want to try to clean up that vagueness. We're not looking to apply any fees at this time. We still want to work with Melissa and our communications team to encourage future property owners to reach out to us and talk to us. But we do need to have some clarity in the municipal code, and I'll turn it over to Catherine, and then if you have any questions, we'll go from there. But keep in mind, we're going to be coming back over the remainder of the year with little pieces of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Vernon. So good evening, everybody. I will be briefly walking through with you all the proposed changes that we have for how certificates of use and occupancy are issued. First, Vernon did a really great job of kind of giving you all the background and the context to this. I'm going to briefly summarize that, and then I will go into some of the goals that we have when making these changes and the proposed changes and the examples that go with them. So it's going to be a really brief presentation, but very important. So Vernon touched on this already, but what is a certificate of use and occupancy? It is a document that certifies that property, buildings, or structures are conforming with our zoning, building codes, or any other applicable laws, and it's indicating that it's suitable for use and occupancy. As Vernon said, our municipal code currently is a bit vague. Right now, a certificate of use and occupancy is required only when there is a new building ready to be occupied or there's a change in use. And these changes that we're proposing, as Vernon said, would be really helpful in us being more proactive and providing resources to business owners that are trying to either open a new business, change in tenant, et cetera. So some of the goals that we have really boil down to clarity, efficiency, and quality service delivery. Clarity is we really want to establish a consistent and comprehensive process that is easier for applicants and more efficient for staff. We want to make sure that we find these issues on the front end rather than 6 months to a year later. We want to encourage timely and accurate completion of development projects in this community, and that goes with the efficiency. If something is not conforming, we want to tell the applicant as quickly as possible. And then finally, I like to tie things back to our strategic plan. This really keeps the city's commitment to excellence, efficiency, and quality service delivery. When we're trying to make changes to these processes, we really want to make sure that we are intentional and that these changes will actually make it better for everybody, not just us. And so here's these are the most common examples that where a new certificate of use and occupancy would be required. We have a new building permit that's already in our municipal code. New business licenses would require a new CUO, a change in ownership, a change in use, which is already in our code, and a change in occupant. And keep in mind, this is only for non-residential properties.
And can you explain again, these are all current examples, or this is a hybrid?
So this is a hybrid.
Okay, because
Yes.
I'm like, I don't know that we have to have a CUF for some of these, but
Yes,
thank you.
this is a hybrid. The new building permit and the change in use are already in the municipal code. So what does this look like? A new building permit is pretty self-explanatory, but say for a new business license, say a local department store decides they want to put a section aside and open a liquor store. They would need a new business license for that and a liquor license, but that would require a new certificate of use and occupancy. The next is a change in ownership. And an example of this, I'm going to be using a local restaurant owner a lot. So, but a local restaurant owner is moving locations and sells the building to another restaurant owner. So there's no change in use, but there's a change in ownership. And what really benefits us as staff in this is that we can start building historical record of businesses, who owns it, what the use is for, and this is really beneficial for us in tracking what the business activity is like in the community. Next is a change in use, which is already in the municipal code. So the owner of a warehouse decides to convert the space into a gymnastics facility. That's quite a significant change that would require a lot of different regulations. These are changes that we would like to know ahead of time so we can have these conversations, give a complimentary inspection, and really engage with the business owner on the front end. And then change in occupant. A fast food restaurant moves out of a building once the lease is up, and another one moves in as the new tenant. Again, no change in use, there's no change in ownership, but it's important for us to really know the new occupant that's occupying the site. Next, I have a couple of recent examples. These don't happen as often, but we've seen them pop up in the last few years, especially with the rise of Airbnb and also with the pandemic, a lot more outdoor activities. Something that we really wanted to include with the new certificate of use and occupancy is the inclusion of property. So not just a building or structure, but the utilization of land. And so an example of this would be a local restaurant owner has a parcel of land behind their business and decides to have an outdoor summer concert series on Wednesday evenings. It's private property that's having an event that extends beyond its original use. While this is not a permanent use, we do have temporary certificates of use and occupancy that would be required in this situation. And then finally, a short-term vacation rental. A homeowner recently bought and remodeled 2 homes in a neighborhood and intends to list them on Airbnb. These are also really important for us to track just because these are homes that are not, do not have people permanently living in them. There are people coming and going. And so, just to quickly summarize the goals that we had earlier, requiring a new certificate of use and occupancy when these instances occur, again, creates a more consistent and predictable process for both applicants and staff. It allows staff to accurately track development and business activity, and it keeps the city's commitment to excellence and quality services by being more proactive in engaging business owners who are really contemplating making an investment in the community. We want to make sure that we get it right as quickly as possible. So, and with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I know we're all happy to answer any questions that y'all might have.
Alderman Brown.
A statement and then a question. So I get it if we're taking it in a warehouse and moving it into a gymnasium. I get that. That it seems like a significant enough change to warrant looking at everything. A restaurant to a restaurant, and I can actually think of 3 right now that have literally taken place in the last couple of weeks in our town. A restaurant to a restaurant, I struggle a little bit with inserting ourselves into that process a little bit. Especially given, I can think at least 2 of them are relatively old establishments, which means I'm sure if we walked in there, it might not be where we would expect things to be based on the changes in code and all the stuff that we've done. So I guess I'm kind of curious what that looks like for a restaurant to a restaurant. What is our inserting ourselves into that process look like?
That's a very good question. And it's multifaceted. First of all, a business owner, and let's use that example. A restaurant exists today and a new chef, new person wants to open a restaurant. The chances are they're going to change it. They're going to change the ambiance inside. They may change the menu. They may change the equipment. And to help them understand what's needed, they may change the signage too, but in the number of tables. So all of that's going to require some involvement from us. And it is our intent, and we've as I mentioned, we've talked about it a lot, is to make an application for a certificate of use and occupancy more common than someone that's going to get a building permit. Because by meeting with that future restaurant owner before they close on a lease or on the building, we can give them the guidance they need to make sure that they can go through the process as smoothly as possible. And something that we talk about, and some of you have been in these meetings with myself and my colleagues, is that in an ideal situation, it is our goal for anybody that's looking to make an investment in our community, that if they meet with staff, they bring their contractor in, their architect, whoever, and they tell us what their vision is, that we should be able to walk away with knowing who their general contractor is, their architect, and city staff, and make it happen. And all they need to do is write a check and move into that building. And that's really why this is such an important precursor to start that off on the right foot.
So am I hearing you accurately that the steps, the things that we would do aren't any different than we would normally do? You're just doing them proactively and in a more consistent and maybe planned way.
Right.
But you're not going to do any new activities that you wouldn't normally do already.
Well, we would get at them sooner, and now we start to build a database of what exists in that property. Because oftentimes, and you may have heard this, that people lease a building and the initial business that was in that building did a lot of things. Some of them may not have been aligned with zoning. Some may have not been aligned with building and fire codes. And it is not our goal to make it onerous for them, but if they've leased the property or purchased the building, what we find as we grow as a community, we have more people saying, well, this business was doing that, why can't I? And we don't have any record of the previous business, they might have had an office and all of a sudden they expanded into a place of assembly. And that's very troubling for us because we want to help people, but if they haven't helped us understand, then we're getting it after the fact. And collecting that application helps us build an understanding of what's conforming, what's not conforming in accordance with zoning as well as building codes. Now, you're probably thinking, well, the city's going to come in and want to get all buildings brought up to current codes. Not true. Not true at all. There's existing building codes that apply to existing buildings. However, some people have taken liberties with their buildings, whether they were recently constructed or decades ago. We just want to get them safe. And then, more importantly, for the new person that's opening a business or investing to be able to go forward with their vision.
Go ahead, Alderman Hanson, then I'll get Alderman Baggett after that.
I'm with the
I'm sorry,
IRS,
Vice
and
Mayor.
I'm here to help you, is exactly what this sounds like.
Say that one more time.
I'm with the IRS, and I'm here to help you. This is really invasive. I mean, I realize what you're trying to do, but it's really super easy to find out what businesses have been in a location. There'll be address history, there'll be tax returns, there'll be probably sales tax of some sort involved, utility records. So I see a broader picture. I don't believe I buy into all this. I cannot support this. It's like you're going to get them in a gotcha moment. What you do is fantastic work, and you are trying to keep people safe and compliant. But the public's viewpoint already of us is that it's very onerous, very invasive, and very challenging, and it's a semi-hostile environment. And you may or may not believe that, but that is true, and I've heard it over and over. So to come over here and add more layers, and like Alderman Brown said, you know, we're going restaurant to restaurant, it is hard enough to run a business in today's economy, much less if we have more governance, more sticking our nose in their business. There's no reason, if a building hasn't been cited before, there hasn't been issues with this person, let's stay out of their business. Most of these people are small business owners. They're having a hard time anyway. We need those businesses in our community, and we need less governance and more respect for the people who are bringing a business into our community. So I just cannot go for any more governance on this code. I cannot. I'm sorry.
Alderman Baggett.
So I think a couple of things. One, I don't know that I agree with, I agree with some of the sentiment of Alderman Hanson, but I think there are a couple of things that I think really are important for all of us to understand. Number one is I think some of this I do have concerns with. But the thing I think this is going to solve is you get out in front of a property owner, and I'm happy to say it, I mean, the Five Stones Church, and if this process had been in place, they would not have probably purchased the property, and then we would have ended up in that situation we're in. So I think that's a net positive, right? We don't want property owners who, with honest and sincere intents, the wires didn't connect, and then you all of a sudden have an organization or a small business in a predicament where they bought a building, and now they are in the position where it doesn't meet, whatever, current code. So this might preempt some of those situations. Part of this would preempt some of those. So extremely good, right? We don't want businesses leasing space, purchasing it. City has no idea. Then all of a sudden find out, then they bought a building that is now under the scrutiny of our zoning ordinance. Like, we don't want that happening, right? I think we can all agree that's a good thing. Because it doesn't end up before us, right? It's preempted. But I do share some concerns with the situation, and I think I know you're telling the truth in that we're not going to require things, but I've insured many businesses where the sprinkler system is not adequate and a trigger hits and there's $100,000. There are lots of our current standards that are there for safety, right? And they are. But there are some, and we can't disagree, we can't deny. There are some additional triggers that this might impact onerously on the business owner. So I'd be curious to know, how that plays out. We want to make sure that obviously everything is up to code, but possibly some provisions where if the work that they're doing on this business, in the restaurant example, say they're not expanding seating capacity and it's a non-conforming use or whatever, or it's a restaurant to restaurant, but say that is not a non-conforming use that's allowable under the zoning ordinance, and they're not expanding capacity, and there's no sprinkler in the restaurant portion. Obviously, there has to be in the cooking area, right? I mean, I don't know if we can differentiate some standards where if we're not expanding the non-conforming use, that we don't maybe require some of the code requirements that would be required. And maybe I'm missing the mark on that, but maybe there's some middle ground there where we could, if the work that is being done on a non-conforming use does not expand the use, that there are certain exceptions that are made on improving, the sprinkler is what I think probably is the biggest ticket item, a lot of these for the safety aspects. And so I know that will come up. And the other thing is just, making sure that we aren't adding, again, like if it's an insurance agency, make it simple. Make it simple for us to just send something over and a non-issue, right? If it's, we don't need additional inspections, take the people, maybe, at their word. I know this, but take people at their word, believe the best. And make it simple for the changes in use that are benign. Let's just do whatever the process is, make it easy, because that's all it is. All we need is another additional step. But they're positives, but I share some concerns, and I want to learn more about how that would play out. And the examples were good. So you did a great job on the examples. It's very complex, though. And the non-conforming on the land, I hope we're not going to be removing the non-conformity allowances. Because there are lots of existing businesses that are in non-conforming uses. And I hope that could really change the makeup of our community, quite frankly. Because some of these long-time businesses have been there, and it's non-conforming, and we're going to have a bunch of people lined up for some of these things if we add something to it. So I know you're aware of those, but make sure that these is written in such a way that respects that, those items.
Vice Mayor?
Matt and Patrick, you're so diplomatic, and Gabrielle, I appreciate your, passion. I'm at a loss for words. First blush, this feels like a little bit of an overreach. I've been here, 12 years now, and I love Vernon saying that Franklin is a desirable community because of the way we set our standards. And I believe in that. I do. We have a set of standards that make us who we are. But I do think I've walked the journey with a couple of business owners, and we all have chinks in our armor. And I think that I have seen certain things happen that I'm like, oh man, or, and it's the way things are written. And you guys are employees of the city that are held accountable to the regulations that sometimes we vote to set before you. Sometimes it's a code that we adopt. But I feel like, and I would love to see a breakout of what is the existing, and what are the new additions. Because remember when I asked you, which ones of these are new? I think that sometimes our good intentions skew the timeline for people and almost cripple them to where they are trying to get to the finish line and are worried that they may not ever be able to make it because this has come up, or this has come up, or I didn't know about this, or this doesn't make sense. And it's very frustrating to be a representative of the city to go, but we really have great intentions, and I'm sorry, and I don't know how to help you, because your hands are often tied too. So to me, that just puts another hand behind our back in a situation. And a question that I have is, you said sometimes we find out after the fact. Is that because somebody says, hey, y'all need to know blah, blah, blah is happening, or it's a visit where you see something that's kind of out of kilter, and then you have to pull them aside and go, hey, did you know that you're out of compliance? I mean, do we have enough staff that we've got watchdogs going around, walking in establishments and recognizing? I don't think we have that. So how are we getting informed that this is a problem and we need to amp up this? Explain that to me.
It's a combination.
Sure.
It could be someone, calling in.
Sure.
If they've seen something, we have to investigate every complaint that we get. It could be the property owner themselves or the tenant that come in and say, I need to get a permit to do this or that. And before we issue that permit, well, we have to have more information.
Sure.
What are, and then I'll tell you, my job is not fun.
Oh, I know it's not, and I have a
To be-
lot of empathy for you.
To be the bad guy and say, I'm sorry, the use that you're trying to put in here after they've purchased this property, that use is not permitted.
And you can go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and the whatever and try this and that, but sometimes.
Sometimes.
Thank you, Shanna, and to all your comments. Absent, filling out an application, a certificate of use and application, essentially one page, stating your name, where the business is, what you're going to propose to do, the number of occupants, some basic information. Really isn't onerous, because the examples that Shanna shared, and we've got a lot more. I didn't even get to Rodney. What that does, it perpetuates that negative experience that as we grow as a community, more people will just try to do what they want, and maybe the neighbors won't say anything, or something won't come up. The electric company has to contact us because they're putting an upgrade of service. And then all of a sudden, that narrative starts to evolve again. And it's not, Shannon put it well, it's not fun for any of us, because we realize the people that buy homes here, the businesses, small and large, that invest in our community, build the community. So why wouldn't we want to know what they want to do so we can help them? We're not the IRS. And I challenge you, and the aldermen that have been here, the mayor, anybody that says that we're being difficult, let's sit down and talk with them, because
And you are wonderful
I
at
don't
that.
buy it. Thank you very much.
You are.
But it's not me. It's Shanna. It'll
No,
be
I
Catherine,
understand.
Rodney. It's everybody that cares about what we do in serving our community. And really, if you think about what you've said, and who you have, all we're asking is to contact us first, so we can understand and guide you.
And how do you educate people to do that?
That's where we would use Monique and Melissa and our communications team to push it out. Gabrielle is a realtor. And I expect if you talk to your realtors as many times as myself and others talk to the board, say anytime you have a non-residential client, have them call us. I'm not so sure they all remember how important that is, even though we've tried to get that out to them.
But doesn't every business have to have a business license in Franklin already that would designate this information?
The business license is, we're trying to, again, from an internal standpoint, is align the applications for business licenses with our certificates of occupancy. So if we have more clarity of when a certificate of occupancy is required, that no matter who you talk to in the city, essentially fill out a business license application, you also fill out the certificate of use and occupancy. If it doesn't require a business license, and they're expanding, or they don't have a certificate of use and occupancy, we want to give them one, so then there's that documentation going forward. So when the next business comes in, we know, to Alderman Baggett's point, what's existing, what's in compliance, what's a non-conforming use. We rarely try to have to say no. Even when somebody's purchased the building, we spend endless hours trying to get them in the right place. But it's not a pleasurable experience. You know that. I know you know
Do
that.
we have the staff to process that in a timely manner as to not cause a delay for a business?
It'll save time. Because the examples that Shannon gave are exhausting and drain our resources. Yes, this, spending a few minutes up front, getting people as points of contact from our team with a business owner, depending on what they're going to do, will actually save time.
And I'm with Alderman Baggett, though there has to be broad exceptions to this and a channel for challenges and disputes that's reasonable and fast.
Mayor,
Go ahead, Alderman Barnhill.
so if, this right here, what does this change for the current resident business owner that's doing business now? What does it change? Nothing, right?
No, nothing.
Nothing. So it changes nothing. So what it changes is there is paperwork and tracking for someone who opens up a new business. First off, if it's a restaurant, they've got to come to the beer board and get a beer permit. They've got to go to the state and get a liquor license. They've got a ton of paperwork already that they're going to do. I don't think this hurts. I really think it helps more than it hurts, okay? I think there'll be some that would be affected by it, but I think there's opportunities for this going forward to be a tracking device and to look and see what we've got. I don't personally have a problem with it. I will say this, if you want to pick on something that is non-conforming, you don't have to go far. I mean, it's right out of New 96 West. It's right now. So, and those things are not there. I mean, we do put those things in, but we're not trying to, I don't think you're trying to zap it to somebody. I think they need to conform and they need to understand. You come into Franklin, there's a level and a standard that you're expected to achieve to, and that's what you're looking for. If you can't afford to do it, we have not had many people or many businesses or whatever turned away if the growth of, 10,000, 20,000 every 10 years?
Yeah,
2,000.
about 2,000 a
Yeah,
year.
we haven't turned many people away. So, I mean, I don't know that I know the minute details of what you're asking for. What you had up there is not, it's not a deal killer and it's not a business killer.
As a business owner, I think I'm looking at this as two different issues. One is the current, new businesses, new spaces. I would want to know if I was going to purchase a building, I would want some check, so that I would want to know that up front, right? I would want to know that there was not trouble down the pike, right? So I think that's good. So I look at that as like one issue, like the CO issue. I think where the concern is I have at this point, and I think it's kind of been echoed, which is it's the changes in occupant. And I think if we got more information about how that is going to work with the change in occupant process, because that's the piece of this that's going to affect current business owners, because it will, Clyde. The change in occupant will affect current business owners or current landlords who own buildings that have a space already outfitted for a certain use. And I think what that triggers, I think we're all thinking about what does that process trigger from a codes compliance standpoint, and how deep does that go? I think I'd like more information on that. Not that making a building more safe, but I guess to the point that it would prohibit I'm good with it until it prohibits the use that had been there previously from actually continuing on because of economic hardship that complying with the new would cause, all because they got a new tenant. So I think that's going to be a tightrope, right? And I get it. And so someone said the grace that we have on this, or however it's written, to give the staff some leeway to do it, is common sense. I know, Shanna, and y'all would want, if it was written there, just use common sense on this, when you can't. It's not. But I know you know it when you see it, and if we can write it on the change of occupant as much as possible, and I know you use common sense all the time, don't get me, but I'm just saying, that is the concern I've heard echoed up here. Vernon, you got a lot of common sense.
But you want to make a comment, Mr. Gerth?
No,
before-
this is good. We'll go
Yeah.
back and, again, before Alderman Brown was appointed to the Development Services Advisory Commission, they spent about 4 months on this topic. So I think what we'll do is, spend some time with Alderman Brown and maybe the Development Services Advisory Commission. And there's no hurry, because this is only the front end. What we want to try to get to, talked about, is about the performance sureties and the residents that are wondering why the public improvements in their neighborhood haven't been completed, but the subdivision's been completed for years. And all of this gets tied to the certificate of use and occupancy continuum. Leasing tenant spaces is just one part of it, and it is complicated. So this is a great discussion. Let us go back and, because I know you have other things on the agenda, and we'll give Rodney a chance to talk next time.
I was just going to offer the one example, right across the street here with Baskin is, I think, a really great example. Landlord worked really hard to get another ice cream vendor in that store. Obviously, an improvement already to the landscape of Main Street. As a neighbor of that business, I'm thrilled to see something coming in that's going to actually take care of the place and do well there. I'd be really curious, what's this process? What would this process have done differently, or maybe the same, had it been implemented already to something like that, where you've literally got a business that was not run well, went out of business, a new business comes in, the exact same kind of business, cleaning it up. Would we have hindered that or helped that? I don't know. I think that's a relevant example of a small case, not a major changeover, but a similar use that would be helpful to understand how this would play out.
I'd like to add a little bit of perspective from my standpoint, which probably is going to be a little bit different than everybody else's, because sometimes I'm the first person that people contact and they say, well, I'm thinking about doing this. And my first response is, go see staff now. Don't come to my office, go over there and see the staff. And I think that this kind of helps push that process forward. The second thing is among my meetings, a number of them are related to people that if they had come in early and told us what they were going to do, I wouldn't be seeing them because they're unhappy. And those meetings usually are with me and Vernon. And so I think it's important, if we can head things off, let's do it. And so I applaud what you're doing. Rodney, thank you for what you're doing, Shanna. Yeah, we do want to hear you talk later, Rodney. and you'll bring some great examples, I'm sure. So you ready to move on? How about ordinance 2022-20, an ordinance to increase from $25,000 to $50,000 the threshold over which public advertisement and sealed competitive bids or proposals are required for non-emergency and non-proprietary purchases.
We have Christine and Brian to talk about what has been changed in state law to allow those of us cities that have a professional purchasing staff and the kind of setup we have to exercise some increased authority. So we'll have, this was brought up at Budget and Finance last week, and the committee recommended that this come to the full board just because of the policy ramifications. So these next couple items all reflect that. Next, I guess, 3 items all reflect that, or 4 items reflect that. So we'll walk through those with you and make sure the full board is getting a chance to reflect on that and give us any feedback.
Can we just kind of consider all those all together?
They're each a little bit different,
Yeah.
so we can kind of just keep rolling through them,
Yeah,
but
let's
they
do
each
that.
have their own unique, kind of question that we're asking you to weigh in on. So take it away.
Good evening. I'm Brian Wilcox, the purchasing manager for the city. Staff recommends that the board consider an increase to the dollar amounts of the various purchasing thresholds now in effect as permitted by Tennessee law. Because the dollar amount required for public advertisement and competitive bidding is established in the city's municipal code, an ordinance is required to amend that provision. Tennessee Code Annotated has recently been amended by Public Chapter 1016, signed by the governor on May 11 this year, and now permits certain local governments, namely those with centralized purchasing authority and a full-time purchasing agent, to increase to an amount not to exceed $50,000 the threshold over which public advertisement and sealed competitive bids or proposals are required for non-emergency, non-proprietary purchases. The city of Franklin is one of those eligible local governments. Staff has identified 4 reasons why the Board of Mayor and Aldermen may wish to consider approving this ordinance. First, while sealed bids and proposals is one means of establishing pricing, it is more cumbersome as a process and therefore may preclude obtaining best pricing in a timely manner. Second, there are times when writing specifications and taking bids or issuing a request for proposals is not practical, as for example, when only one supplier of a product or service is available. Raising the sealed bid and proposal threshold would increase the spectrum of purchases that may be handled without the need for a formal procurement process. Third, the dollar amount required for public advertisement and competitive bidding was last adjusted in 2010 by Ordinance 2010-72. The purchasing power of the dollar has been reduced by inflation since that time. Fourth, raising the sealed bid proposal threshold would allow city staff to focus more of its attention on higher valued purchases, thereby allowing for increased efficiency and effectiveness of the purchasing function. I wish to note that because of how the state law is written, the dollar amount of purchases at or above which is required 3 quotes if possible would, if the ordinance is approved, automatically increase from 10,000 to 20,000 effective simultaneously. So there are 2 thresholds to keep in mind. The one that is adjusted by the ordinance directly is the sealed bid or proposal threshold would go from 25 to 50,000. The lower threshold is for 3 competitive quotes if possible. That would go from 10,000 to 20,000. Staff recommends that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen approve Ordinance 2022-20 on first reading. I believe it's on the agenda at 7 p.m. this evening.
Alderman Brown?
I did watch this Budget and Finance meeting, so I did get the context of it, of the discussion. And I can appreciate staying aligned to the state guidances. I think there's something clean and good about that. I guess my biggest question, though, as I was watching that was the curiosity of how many 24999 projects we get through here, and then therefore how many 49999 projects are we going to start getting with this increase? Is that and I don't know the numbers, I don't know how many of those we do get, but how many are we going to see just at an increased threshold to 49 by making this move?
Well, if your point is that a threshold is still a threshold, certainly agree. And no matter where we set the threshold, there will be times we go, ugh, if only. I will say, though, that as staff has reviewed the procurement stats over the years, we try to look big picture. We look across the organization. In other words, not just one department, not just one single purchase, but across all departments and across the fiscal year. So, and we do look for opportunities for us to bid out where the spend amount in the big picture warrants spending the time and effort to go to that process. And we will continue to follow that practice. I can say that I hope I'm right about this, that I think our departments are careful not to submit requisitions for $1 less than the threshold, because I tell them all the time, that's a red flag for the auditors. You might as well not do that.
Sure.
Let's go ahead and do this the right way. Something that's happened in public procurement over the last dozen years or so is something called cooperative purchasing arrangements have cropped up that cater to local governments across the United States, and they have significantly reduced the demand, I'll call it, for going through our own competitive process. We are now able to find contracts that have been competitively established much more than we ever used to be able to do. So we're able to take advantage of competitive pricing without having to invest our own time and effort to develop it.
Thank you, Phil.
The other thing I would just note too is that's part of why we have those quote requirements that provides some safeguard. It's more streamlined, but it provides a safeguard to say, well, what else did you look at before you got this pricing? And why is this better than the other? So there are mechanisms in place. They're just not as formal and they're not as cumbersome. And that's kind of the decision that you're making, is where do you want to have that differentiation. So all that Brian said is exactly on target. And the thing I look at is there's still a place where we're comparing in a check. Is this a good value, and why are we choosing this option versus others?
How about number 8 then? Resolution to rescind certain resolutions granting authority to the city administrator and replacing said solutions, as well as granting new authorities to the city administrator.
So I can speak a little bit to this, and Christine, Brian, feel free to add on. There are two things going on here. We've had the city administrator authority sort of mirror that 25,000, so they're sort of matching that with the contracting authority. And so we're adjusting that to have parity there as well, as we've done in the past. And again, that was done around that same time when that 25,000 limit was put in place over 10 years ago. We are also rescinding about 3 other resolutions that had different types of authority granted at one time, so you could all see it in one place. So we kind of consolidated that, restated some of those. We did add a couple things, and let me highlight what we added. We added the approval of parkland agreements that are fee only. So when they're just saying, I'm going to write you the check per unit, you know, those are coming through to you, and we never have a discussion about that because they're just deciding to make the payment into the fund. So that's one that we looked at and would suggest that we add. The other element that is not a restatement is really item 7. It's a clarification about the ability to terminate a contract. You know, that came up a few months ago, or a couple meetings ago, where there was really poor performance and we needed to get out of that contract and get on to a new provider. We had to wait to bring it to you to fully terminate that contract and come back with what would happen. You still would be awarding the replacement or the next provider in that sort of circumstance, but we could move on and we could probably find an interim position until you could act. So that just made that clear, that you're entrusting the administrator to make a termination with cause of an existing agreement or contract. So those are the 2 that we added. The others are all in other places, and we just consolidated them into this new resolution, and then, as I said, updated that value amount. So anything to add, Christine or Brian?
I guess the one thing I would add from the committee, Shauna Billingsley, our city attorney, was with us at the committee, and she talked about what she certainly was part of putting this together, and she helped identify what could be concisely put together in one resolution. Just makes it easier for someone down the road to find it. So she couldn't be with us tonight, but she and then certainly our assistant city attorney, Mr. Squires, helped us kind of formulate a little bit more tweaking after the committee meeting. So we have worked with law department.
How about item 9? Resolution 2022-41, adopting a revised purchasing policy.
One thing I'll add, there's always this provision that we make sure we notify you of the actions that are taken on your behalf. So that's still showing up. You see that on every agenda. So there is a clear transparency about when we've used the authority, and you can see the specific actions that we've used under the authority you've granted. So you all know that, you all see that on every agenda, but folks who may be watching at home, I just want to make sure there's that understanding that we take that authority really seriously, and we make sure that we continually and regularly report back to you about the use of it.
So item 9 is about the purchasing policy, and staff recommends several changes to the purchasing policy for city procurements not pertaining to new construction. First, to update the policy to reflect the new $50,000 threshold should the Board of Mayor and Aldermen approve Ordinance 2022-20. Second, to update the purchasing policy to reflect the new $20,000 threshold over which 3 quotes are required. Third, to clarify that the 3 quotes for purchases in the 3-quote range are to be from different suppliers and service providers. And fourthly, to otherwise make updates to the policy. You have in your agenda packet both the clean version attached to the resolution, but it may be helpful for you to see a red line version that is also attached to the agenda packet showing all of the recommended changes to the purchasing policy. So staff recommends that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen approve Resolution 2022-41. That is not on tonight's agenda, and the reason is that the ordinance about the threshold requires 2 readings. And so we're timing the presentation or your consideration of the resolution on the purchasing policy to coincide with the second reading of the ordinance, which will be July 12th.
And how about the Resolution 2022-42, adopting a revised vendor protest procedure for the City of Franklin procurements not pertaining to new construction?
Mayor, staff recommends the vendor protest procedure be further revised in 4 ways. First, and this is going to sound familiar, is to update the protest procedure to reflect the new $50,000 threshold should the board choose to approve Ordinance 2022-20. Second, to designate the city administrator instead of a panel to hear appeals of purchasing manager decisions pertaining to bid protests. This doesn't come up very often, as we discussed at the Budget and Finance Committee, but we need to have a process in place. The concept of a panel came from an outside resource that is highly reputable, but in a city manager form of government we have here in Franklin, it seems completely appropriate for that appeal to be heard by the city administrator rather than a panel of staff. Third, to clarify that to clarify what the deadlines are for submitting and acting on protests and appeals of purchasing manager decisions, and finally to otherwise update the policy. Here again, in addition to the clean revised protest procedure attached to the resolution, also attached in your agenda packet is a red line version showing all of the changes that are being recommended. Staff recommends that the board approve Resolution 2022-42. Here again, this is not on your 7 p.m. agenda today, but it will be on July 12th. so that it comes simultaneous to your consideration of the ordinance.
You generated a lot of excitement for a lot of meetings, Brian. And we'll remember the $50,000, $20,000. So any other business?
Yes, Mayor, I've got one item of other business, and it's really just a request for the July 12th, I believe, work session. We're bringing back the public expression discussion, and which was very good last time, and a lot surrounding that. But I wanted to ask and even get some feedback, but maybe not into the details, because we're going to have that discussion on the 12th. But I think a request would be to start looking at, through that public expression process, and then thinking about the special event process. And, you know, I feel like we need to have some revision of our application process in both of those situations that kind of set expectations for the applicants and for staff and for the public, kind of just some, you know, basic parameters for that protect the spaces for all of our citizens to enjoy. You know, on the square, you know, I think we've talked about amplification. We've talked about different things that could happen in the parks, and you know, all in anywhere anyone would want to have an expression event or a special event. Just kind of leveling some expectations and have staff kind of start developing those. Happy to provide some color, you know, in individual meetings, but I think it's important that the citizens know the expectations, and that frankly, it's respectful for the event organizers to understand the expectations, and then for us to know and staff to know programming bits that could, you know, that make these places, you know, invitable and enjoyable for everyone, including the attendees, including the organizers and the general public. So just wanted to see if staff, if other members of the board would like for that to be added to that July 12th discussion.
Alderman Brown?
Yeah, I absolutely wholeheartedly support that. I've been struck the last couple of weeks of just the amount of time that we can spend in discussion on a sidewalk or a buffer on a development plan, but don't spend really any time understanding the details of an event that happens. It almost seems sort of perfunctory, the approval of a permit. And I think in some cases, maybe that's appropriate. In other cases, definitely not. And I think to have more, and you know, we always have the ability to ask questions, so I'm not suggesting for a second that information isn't available. But certainly as a new alderman, never thought to maybe ask all those questions. And so I think to create a process that invokes that and creates that dialogue would be really important. So fully support that.
Anybody else? All right, we'll see you at 7 o'clock.